Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip, not to some exotic beach or a bustling metropolis, but back in time. We're going to step, rather ungracefully, right into the heart of a Victorian house, circa 1880. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hum of your air conditioning fading, the glow of your phone screen dimming, and the scent of freshly laundered sheets replaced by, well, something a little less fresh. You're about to discover why, despite all your modern comforts and conveniences, you probably wouldn't last 24 hours in this seemingly elegant bygone era. It's not just about the lack of Wi-Fi, trust me. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a surprisingly hard, probably uncarpeted floor. The air isn't quite right. It's heavy, not just with the dust of ages, though there's plenty of that, but with a cocktail of scents your modern nose simply isn't equipped to handle. There's the distinct, slightly acrid tang of coal smoke, clinging to everything like an unwelcome guest. Beneath that, a subtle, sweet decay from unemptied chamber pots in distant rooms, perhaps, or lingering food odors from last night's dinner. And then there's the underlying, ever-present scent of people. Unwashed, certainly, by today's standards, and not always particular about their bodily functions, if we're being honest. Your pristine, hypoallergenic world is suddenly a distant memory, replaced by a sensory assault. The first thing that hits you, besides the smell, is the chill. Not an active, biting cold, but a persistent, damp chill that seems to seep into your very bones. Central heating is a distant dream, a concept yet to be fully imagined, let alone implemented. You shiver, pulling your imaginary modern clothes tighter, wishing for a thermostat to crank up. The fire in the hearth, if there even is one, offers only localized warmth, leaving the rest of the grand room in a perpetual state of goosebumps. You scan the room, your eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Electric bulbs? Forget about it. You're reliant on gaslight, if you're lucky enough to be in a more affluent home, or more likely, flickering oil lamps and candles. The shadows dance and play tricks on your eyes, making the familiar seem eerie and the unknown even more unsettling. Now, let's talk about the hygiene, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. You're probably picturing elegant ladies and gentlemen, pristine in their finery. And while their outer garments might have been impressive, their inner workings, and indeed, their houses, were a different story. Mainstream historical fact: indoor plumbing as we know it, with flushing toilets and constant running water, was a luxury, and often a rudimentary one, even in the wealthiest homes. Most houses relied on outdoor privies, or, more commonly, chamber pots that would be emptied, if you were lucky, once a day by a servant. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly understood germ theory or simply associated bad smells with disease, but either way, sanitation was a far cry from what you're used to. Imagine waking up and realizing the bathroom is a short, chilly walk outside, or that the only toilet facility is a ceramic pot under your bed. Charming, isn't it? The air itself feels thick, almost palpable. Not just the smells, but the particulates. Coal dust, lint from wool and cotton, and whatever else was stirred up by daily life. Your lungs, accustomed to filtered, air-conditioned environments, would be working overtime. You might find yourself coughing, a dry, ticklish cough, as your body tries to expel the unfamiliar invaders. And speaking of invaders, don't even get me started on the critters. Rodents, insects of all kinds, they were simply a part of daily life. Pest control was rudimentary at best, often involving traps, poisons, or just living with them. A quirky tidbit: some Victorians believed that mice kept spiders away, so they tolerated them. You might spot a scurrying shadow in your peripheral vision, and your skin would immediately begin to crawl. This isn't just a house. It's a living, breathing, unhygienic entity, and you, my friend, are right in the middle of it. And you've only just arrived. So, you've survived the initial sensory assault of the Victorian house. Congratulations. But don't get too comfortable, because your next challenge arrives with the dawn, getting dressed. You, with your stretchy yoga pants and easy-on t-shirts, are about to face a wardrobe that makes a Rubik's Cube look like child's play. Imagine trying to get into an outfit that requires, at minimum, 3 other people and a small engineering degree. First, there are the undergarments. And no, I don't mean your comfortable, seamless modern briefs. You're looking at chemises, drawers, flannel petticoats, layers upon layers designed not for comfort, but for warmth, modesty, and to create the correct silhouette. The fabric is thick, often wool, and probably a bit scratchy. You're already feeling warmer, but not in a good way, more in a, I think I'm slowly suffocating in a wool blanket kind of way. Then comes the corset. Ah, the infamous corset. Forget what you think you know from Hollywood, where heroines faint gracefully. In reality, it's a rigid, tightly laced garment designed to cinch your waist to an improbable circumference, pushing everything else up or down. You'd probably consider it a medieval torture device. Mainstream historical fact: corsets were worn by women across all social classes, though the materials and quality varied greatly. While often associated with extreme tight lacing, many corsets were simply supportive garments, akin to a bra and girdle combined. However, for the fashionable Victorian woman, the ideal was often a dramatically small waist, achieved through persistent lacing. You'd be struggling for breath within minutes, your diaphragm protesting the sudden compression. Try to take a deep, satisfying yawn. You'll find it's more of a shallow gasp. The simple act of bending over to pick up something you dropped would become an Olympic sport, likely resulting in a strained back or a sudden, undignified tumble. And then, over the corset, come more petticoats, sometimes starched for stiffness, sometimes simply to add bulk. Remember those crinolines? Those massive, bell-shaped cages that made women look like they were floating on air? If you're going out, you're wearing one of those. A quirky tidbit: to navigate through doorways, women often had to turn sideways, sometimes even tilting their crinoline cages to squeeze through. Imagine trying to sit down gracefully without flipping the entire contraption over your head. It's a delicate dance of balance and spatial awareness you simply don't possess. You'd feel cumbersome, restricted, and utterly ridiculous. Your natural stride, so free and easy, would be reduced to a series of short, shuffling steps. Running for a bus? Forget about it. Even a brisk walk would be a struggle, each breath a conscious effort. Historians still argue whether the physical discomfort and potential health issues of corsetry outweighed the social pressures and aesthetic ideals it represented. But for you, right now, it's just about the sheer agony of being trussed up like a holiday turkey. And this is just for the ladies. Gentlemen, don't think you're off the hook. While not as outwardly restrictive, your attire would also be far more complex and formal than anything you're used to. Multiple layers of shirts, waistcoats, tailored coats, stiff collars, and cravats that need to be perfectly tied. Buttons everywhere, small and fiddly. Your comfortable jeans and hoodie are a distant, wistful memory. The idea of casual wear simply doesn't exist. Every outing, even a simple stroll, requires a full, formal ensemble. You'd spend at least an hour just getting dressed, and probably another hour just trying to figure out how to fasten all the tiny buttons. The fabrics themselves are heavy, designed for warmth in poorly heated homes and against the elements. Wool, tweed, thick cottons. Forget the lightweight, breathable synthetics you take for granted. You'd feel perpetually warm and a bit clammy, no matter the weather. And God forbid you spill something. Cleaning these garments isn't a quick cycle in the washing machine. It's a laborious, multi-day process involving specialized laundresses and harsh chemicals. You'd quickly realize that simply getting dressed is an act of endurance, a daily battle against fabric and laces, a battle you, with your modern sensibilities, are entirely unprepared for. You're already dreaming of your sweatpants. You've somehow managed to wrestle yourself into a semblance of Victorian attire, feeling more like a tightly bound parcel than a human being. Now, with the sun barely peeking through the smoggy London sky, or wherever this particular house is situated, your thoughts turn to the morning ritual of personal hygiene. And this, my friend, is where your modern sensibilities will truly buckle. Forget your spacious, tiled bathroom with its gleaming porcelain, hot and cold running water, an array of scented soaps and lotions. That's a fantasy yet to be invented. You're likely in a bedroom, or perhaps a small, unheated dressing room. Your facilities consist of a washstand, a small table with a basin, a pitcher of water, and perhaps a small, rough towel. The water in the pitcher? It's cold. Very cold. It was probably brought up by a servant hours ago and has since reached the ambient temperature of the chilly room. Mainstream historical fact. While some wealthier Victorian homes began to incorporate rudimentary indoor plumbing towards the latter half of the century, it was far from widespread, and certainly not the pressurized, instantly hot water systems we enjoy today. Even in grand houses, you'd often find only a few shared bathrooms, and hot water would need to be heated on the stove or in a boiler and then carried to where it was needed. For the vast majority, cold water in a basin was the norm. You dip your hand into the frigid liquid, a gasp escaping your lips. The shock alone is enough to wake you up, perhaps more effectively than any espresso. You're faced with a bar of soap. It's probably harsh, unscented, and designed for utility rather than luxury. There's no gentle body wash, no exfoliating scrub, no moisturizing cream. Your skin, accustomed to pampering, immediately feels stripped and tight. You splash the icy water onto your face, a grimace distorting your features. The invigorating feeling quickly gives way to a lingering chill. And what about your hair? A full hair wash would be an event, requiring heated water, a laborious process of scrubbing with harsh lye-based soaps, and then hours to dry in the unheated air. Most people would simply brush their hair vigorously and perhaps use a dry shampoo or powder to absorb oil. A quirky tidbit: some Victorian hair tonics contained ingredients like lead or even arsenic, promising lustrous locks while slowly poisoning the user. Suddenly, your modern shampoo doesn't seem so bad, does it? Oral hygiene is another delightful challenge. Your electric toothbrush, your fluoride toothpaste, your mouthwash, all non-existent. You're looking at a brush with stiff bristles, possibly made of animal hair, and a pot of tooth powder. This powder might contain charcoal, brick dust, or even crushed cuttlefish bone. The sensation is abrasive, and the taste, well, let's just say it's not mini fresh. Historians still argue about the prevalence of dental issues in the Victorian era, but it's safe to say that cavities, tooth loss, and gum disease were far more common and painful than today. You'd quickly appreciate the miracle of modern dentistry, even if it means a trip to the dreaded dentist. And then there's the call of nature. We touched on chamber pots earlier, but let's revisit them. Imagine needing to use the toilet in the middle of the night. You'd stumble in the dark, perhaps with only a candle, to locate your ceramic pot. In the morning, it would be emptied by a servant, or if you were lower class, by yourself. The contents would then be disposed of, often into a cesspit or, in urban areas, directly into the streets or sewers, contributing to the delightful aromas we discussed in Section 1. The sheer lack of privacy, the cold, the basic nature of it all would make you long for the simple flush of a modern toilet like never before. You emerge from this morning ritual feeling less refreshed and more gritty. Your skin is cold, your hair feels a bit greasy, and your mouth tastes faintly of chalk. You've barely started your day, and already you've faced down a gauntlet of discomfort and inconvenience. The idea of a quick, hot shower or a leisurely bath is a luxurious fantasy, a distant dream from a world you've left behind. You're beginning to understand that cleanliness, in the Victorian era, was a relative term and certainly not a comfortable one. Having braved the frigid waters and abrasive soaps of your morning ablutions, you're now probably feeling a gnawing emptiness in your stomach. Breakfast. You envision a spread, fluffy pancakes, fresh fruit, maybe some avocado toast. Snap out of it. You're in a Victorian house, and culinary delights, especially at breakfast, are a concept yet to fully blossom. You trudge, still feeling somewhat encased in your elaborate clothing, down to the dining room. The air here might be slightly warmer if a fire has been stoked, but the chill still permeates the corners. The table is laid, but it's not the vibrant, colorful spread you're used to. Instead, it's a rather monochromatic affair, dominated by various shades of beige and brown. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian breakfasts, particularly for the middle and upper classes, were substantial but often quite repetitive. They focused on heavy, starchy, and protein-rich foods designed to provide energy for a day of work or managing a large household. Think porridge, often made with oats or semolina, served thick and perhaps with a dollop of treacle or plain milk. Then there might be cold meats left over from the previous night's dinner, like sliced ham or beef. Eggs were a staple, often boiled or fried, but without the gourmet flair of a modern brunch menu. And of course, toast, thick slices, probably a bit dry, served with butter and perhaps a simple jam. No fancy artisanal breads here. You spoon some of the porridge into your bowl. It's bland, comforting in its own way, but utterly lacking in the explosions of flavor your palate expects. You try a slice of cold meat. It tastes meaty. There's no delicate seasoning, no fresh herbs, just the straightforward, unadorned flavor of preserved protein. You yearn for a strong cup of coffee, perhaps a latte. What you get, instead, is likely a very weak tea or possibly chicory coffee, a common, cheaper substitute made from roasted and ground chicory root, which has a distinctly earthy, slightly bitter taste. A far cry from your favorite barista's concoction. A quirky tidbit, to add a bit of flavor and sustenance to their morning drinks. Some Victorians would even add a raw egg to their tea or coffee. Imagine that, a slimy, uncooked egg yolk swirling in your hot beverage. It's certainly a unique way to get your protein, but probably not one that will tempt your modern taste buds. You try to imagine yourself doing it, and quickly recoil. The atmosphere at the breakfast table is also different. Forget casual chatter or scrolling through your phone. Meals, even breakfast, were often formal affairs, especially in larger households. There's an unspoken expectation of decorum, of proper posture, and polite, if limited, conversation. Children might be seen but rarely heard, speaking only when spoken to. You'd feel the weight of these unwritten rules, struggling to maintain the proper etiquette while secretly wishing for a comfortable chair and a plate of scrambled eggs with hot sauce. Historians still argue whether the dietary choices of the Victorians contributed to specific health issues, with some pointing to the high fat and sugar content in many dishes, while others emphasize the lack of fresh, easily accessible fruits and vegetables year-round for the average person. But for you, the immediate concern is the monotony. Every day, the same porridge, the same cold meats, the same dry toast. Your inner food critic, accustomed to global cuisines and endless variety, would be in a state of utter despair. You finish your meal, feeling full but not entirely satisfied. It's sustenance, certainly, but it lacks the joy, the freshness, the sheer choice you're accustomed to. The sugar rush from your usual sugary cereal or the protein punch from your smoothie is nowhere to be found. Instead, you're left with a heavy feeling, ready for a day of, well, you're not entirely sure what, but you have a sneaking suspicion it won't involve lounging on a sofa watching Netflix. Your 24 hours are ticking, and you're already feeling the pinch of Victorian life. Breakfast, such as it was, is over. Now, you might be thinking of settling down with a good book, or perhaps catching up on emails. Not a chance. In a Victorian household, especially one of any size, the day quickly devolves into a relentless, never-ending cycle of chores. Your soft hands, accustomed to swiping screens and typing on keyboards, are about to discover the true meaning of manual labor. Mainstream historical fact: without electricity, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, or dishwashers, every single aspect of household maintenance was incredibly labor-intensive. Even for families wealthy enough to afford a retinue of servants, the work was still immense. For middle-class households, where perhaps one or two general servants were employed, or for those without any help at all, the burden fell squarely on the lady of the house and her children. You, my friend, are about to join their ranks. First, there's the heating. Remember that persistent chill? To combat it, fires need to be lit and maintained in every room where warmth is desired. This means hauling heavy scuttles of coal from a cellar or outdoor shed, shoveling it into grates, and then constantly poking, stoking, and clearing ash. Your clothes, which you so painstakingly donned this morning, are quickly going to be smudged with soot. Your hands will be grimy, your back will ache, and your lungs will be inhaling fine coal dust. Forget about a clean house. Even keeping it warm is a dirty, demanding job. Then there's the cleaning. Oh, the cleaning. Dust, pervasive and relentless, settles on every surface. Polishing furniture to a gleam requires hours of elbow grease, using special waxes and cloths. Floors, whether wooden or tiled, need to be swept, scrubbed, and often polished by hand. Carpets, where they exist, are beaten outdoors to remove dust, a strenuous and noisy task. Imagine dragging heavy furniture rolling up massive rugs, and then taking them outside to beat them with a special carpet beater until clouds of dust erupt. A quirky tidbit: some wealthier homes had dusting day, where all the furniture was covered in sheets and the entire house was given a deep clean, often taking several days. You'd be participating in this grand, exhausting ritual. Laundry is another Herculean effort. There are no washing machines to toss your clothes into. Every item of clothing, every sheet, every towel must be washed by hand. This involves boiling water, often over an open fire, scrubbing clothes on a washboard with harsh lye soap, rinsing them repeatedly, wringing them out by hand, and then hanging them to dry, often outdoors, rain or shine. Think about your favorite delicate blouse. It wouldn't stand a chance. Your hands would quickly become raw and chapped from the hot water and harsh chemicals. Historians still argue about the true impact of these strenuous domestic duties on the health of Victorian women, but one thing is certain: it was physically demanding work. And food preparation? Even a simple meal requires forethought and effort. No pre-packaged ingredients, no microwavable dinners. Vegetables need to be washed, peeled, and chopped by hand. Meat needs to be trimmed, and cooking is done on a range or in a large hearth, requiring constant monitoring of temperatures and fuel. Even getting water for cooking or washing is a chore, often involving pumping it from a well or cistern and carrying it indoors in heavy buckets. You'd quickly discover that the Victorian house is not a place of leisure, but a relentless factory of domestic toil. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through a drafty window, signifies another task that needs doing. Your smartphone, your laptop, your remote control, they all seem like artifacts from a distant, lazy future. You're learning the hard way that relaxing at home was not a Victorian concept. Your 24-hour clock is ticking down, and you're already covered in dust, sweat, and perhaps a bit of coal smut. You've just spent the better part of your morning battling dust, coal, and dirty laundry. You're probably feeling a bit disheveled, perhaps a smudge of soot on your cheek, and certainly not ready for a selfie. But alas, the Victorian day isn't just about physical exertion. It's also a minefield of social complexities. You're about to discover that your casual, modern interactions are a catastrophic breach of etiquette in this era. Imagine running into someone you know, or perhaps being introduced to a new acquaintance. Your instinct might be a friendly wave, a firm handshake, or even a casual, "Hey, how's it going?" Forget all that. In the Victorian era, every social interaction, from a formal call to a chance encounter on the street, was governed by a labyrinthine set of unwritten rules. These rules dictated everything: how you greeted someone, what you discussed, how long you stayed, and even the subtle nuances of your body language. Mainstream historical fact: calling cards were essential tools of Victorian social interaction. A lady or gentleman would leave their card at a house they wished to visit, and the host would then respond by leaving their own card or sending an invitation. The corner of the card might even be folded to indicate the nature of the visit. For example, a folded corner might mean a farewell call or a congratulatory visit. Misinterpret a fold, and you could accidentally insult your host or make a social gaffe. You'd be fumbling with these small pieces of pasteboard, unsure when to present them, or if you even had any to begin with. The conversation itself would be a minefield. Topics considered acceptable for polite discourse were limited. Politics, religion, and anything too personal or controversial were usually avoided, especially in mixed company. Instead, discussions revolved around safe subjects: the weather, recent travel, art, or perhaps literature. Your modern tendency to immediately share your opinions, debate current events, or talk about your feelings would be met with stiff silence and polite, yet horrified, stares. You'd quickly learn to censor yourself, biting your tongue more often than not. A quirky tidbit: even the way you held your teacup could be a social indicator. Holding it with a raised pinky finger, a common caricature, was actually considered vulgar in some circles, a sign of trying too hard. The polite way was to cup the entire handle in your hand, or perhaps use just your index finger through the handle and your thumb on top for balance. Imagine trying to keep track of such minutiae while simultaneously trying to sound intelligent and charming. It's enough to make you long for the simple anonymity of an online chat room. Historians still argue about the true motivations behind such rigid social codes. Were they a way to maintain social order and class distinctions, or simply a reflection of an era that valued decorum and restraint above all else. For you, however, it simply means constant anxiety. You'd be perpetually worried about saying the wrong thing, making the wrong gesture, or wearing the wrong expression. The gentle sarcasm you enjoy employing, it would likely fly over most heads, or, worse, be taken as genuine rudeness. Your easygoing confidence would evaporate, replaced by a nervous self-consciousness. The idea of being yourself simply isn't an option. You're expected to conform, to play a specific role, and to adhere to a script that's been centuries in the making. The simple act of entering a room or engaging in a brief conversation would feel like a theatrical performance, with you constantly on edge, waiting for your cue and hoping not to trip over your lines. You'd miss the freedom of modern communication, where a quick emoji or a casual text can convey more than a dozen carefully chosen formal phrases. The pressure to always be on and perfectly proper would be exhausting, adding another layer to the already overwhelming challenges of surviving your 24 hours in this rigid world. You've navigated the social quicksand of Victorian etiquette, likely with a few awkward silences and perhaps a subtly raised eyebrow or two aimed in your direction. Now, as the afternoon stretches out, you might be yearning for a moment to unwind. Perhaps stream an episode of your favorite show, scroll through social media, or listen to some music. Forget it. The concept of effortless entertainment is as foreign here as central heating. You're about to discover that Victorian leisure time, far from being a relaxing escape, often involved considerable effort and a distinct lack of instant gratification. Your modern mind, accustomed to a constant stream of curated content, would quickly find itself in a state of profound boredom. Mainstream historical fact: without electricity, there were no radios, televisions, or record players. Music, if desired, had to be performed live. This meant gathering around a piano, perhaps with someone playing a violin or singing. If you didn't have musical talent in the household, your musical entertainment was limited to attending a public concert or, more commonly, simply doing without. Imagine a quiet evening, where the only sounds are the crackling of a fire and perhaps the rustle of a turning page. The constant background hum of modern life, the endless playlists and podcasts, are utterly absent. You'd feel the silence, deep and perhaps a little unnerving. Reading was a popular pastime, certainly, but not in the way you know it. No Kindle, no unlimited access to millions of titles. Books were expensive, and while lending libraries existed, your choices would be limited. The daily newspaper was a dense, text-heavy affair, often filled with lengthy reports and editorials, far from the bite-sized headlines and sensationalism of today's digital news. A quirky tidbit: many Victorian novels, like those by Charles Dickens, were first published in serialized form in magazines, leaving readers on cliffhangers for weeks or months. Imagine waiting half a year to find out what happens to your favorite character. The instant gratification of binge-watching would be an alien concept. Beyond reading and live music, leisure often involved more active and less passive engagement. Board games, often intricate and requiring patience, were common. Embroidery, knitting, or other needlework occupied the ladies of the house for hours. Gentlemen might engage in card games, billiards, or, if affluent enough, hunting and fishing. These weren't quick, casual activities. They were time-consuming pursuits requiring skill and dedication. You'd likely find your attention span, honed by rapid-fire digital content, utterly unsuited to these slower-paced activities. Historians still argue about whether the slower pace of Victorian life fostered deeper engagement with arts and literature or simply led to more widespread boredom. But for you, the lack of immediate stimulation would be a stark reality. There's no quick game on your phone, no mindless scrolling to fill the empty moments. You are forced to confront the quiet, the stillness, and the need to actively make your own entertainment. Your fingers would twitch for a touchscreen. Your eyes would yearn for the vibrant glow of a high-definition display. Even social visits, remember those? They weren't always for entertainment. They were often about fulfilling social obligations, maintaining networks, and exchanging carefully vetted information. The idea of hanging out in a relaxed, informal way is a luxury of a later era. You'd be perpetually on, even in your downtime, constantly aware of your conduct and presentation. As the afternoon progresses, you'd feel the weight of this unplugged existence. The absence of television, of radio, of the internet. It's not just an inconvenience. It's a fundamental shift in the very fabric of daily life. Your brain, accustomed to constant input, would start to feel sluggish, yearning for the stimulation it's been denied. You might even find yourself talking to yourself, just to fill the silence. You're discovering that a Victorian house isn't just physically challenging, it's mentally, and perhaps spiritually, draining for the modern soul. The day is wearing on, and you're probably feeling a distinct rumbling in your stomach. Lunch was likely a lighter affair, perhaps some bread, cheese, or leftover cold cuts. Nothing to write home about. Now, as you contemplate dinner, your thoughts might drift to your modern refrigerator, packed with fresh produce and neatly packaged meats, or perhaps the convenience of a takeout menu. Prepare for a rude awakening, because in a Victorian house, food preservation was a constant battle against spoilage, and a risky business indeed. Mainstream historical fact: refrigeration as we know it didn't exist. Iceboxes, rudimentary insulated cabinets filled with blocks of ice, were only available to the wealthiest and required regular deliveries of ice. For the vast majority of households, food preservation relied on methods like salting, smoking, pickling, curing, or simply consuming fresh produce immediately before it spoiled. Imagine trying to keep meat or dairy fresh in a warm pantry during summer. It was a race against time and bacteria. Meat was often salted or smoked to extend its life, giving it a very different flavor and texture than the fresh cuts you're used to. Vegetables were pickled in vinegar or preserved in root cellars, meaning seasonal availability dictated your diet far more strictly. Your modern palate, accustomed to crisp, unblemished produce flown in from across the globe, would find itself sorely tested. That perfect avocado or ripe strawberry in January. Pure fantasy. A quirky tidbit: before the widespread availability of ice, some clever Victorians would use cool, damp larders or even place food in earthenware pots submerged in cold streams or wells to try and keep it from spoiling too quickly. The ingenuity was admirable, but the results were far from reliable. You'd be constantly inspecting food for signs of spoilage, sniffing suspiciously at everything before you dared to take a bite. The phrase food poisoning would take on a terrifying new meaning. And cooking itself was a labor-intensive affair. Remember those roaring fires from this morning? They're essential for the kitchen range. Controlling the temperature on a coal or wood-fired stove is an art form you don't possess. You can't just dial in 350 degrees. It requires constant monitoring, adding fuel, and adjusting dampers. Overcook something and it's ruined. Undercook it and you risk illness. Your modern, temperature-controlled oven is a marvel of simplicity by comparison. Historians still argue about the typical Victorian diet's nutritional adequacy, especially for the poorer classes who relied heavily on cheap, starchy foods and had limited access to fresh produce year-round. But for you, the sheer uncertainty of food safety would be a constant source of anxiety. Every meal would be a gamble. Is that meat still good? Has the milk turned? Did the cook properly sanitize everything with only cold water and basic soap? You'd be faced with meals that are heavy, often overcooked, and designed for sustenance rather than gourmet delight. Stews, roasted meats, boiled vegetables. Hearty, yes, but often lacking in subtlety or variety. The vibrant, fresh flavors you crave would be notably absent. And forget about refrigerating leftovers for tomorrow's lunch. They'd likely be gone by morning, either consumed or spoiled. As dinner approaches, you're not just hungry. You're also acutely aware of the challenges involved in getting food from farm to table in this era. The invisible chain of modern food safety regulations, refrigeration, and transportation that you take for granted is suddenly glaringly absent. Your appreciation for your own kitchen, with its humming appliances and readily available ingredients, would soar. You're not just eating a meal. You're consuming a testament to human ingenuity and the harsh realities of a pre-industrialized food system. And frankly, you're feeling a little queasy. You've made it through breakfast, survived the demanding chores, navigated the social niceties, and even risked dinner. But what happens when the inevitable strikes? A headache, a scraped knee, a sudden fever. In your world, a quick trip to the pharmacy or a call to a doctor is usually all it takes. In a Victorian house, a minor ailment could quickly become a life-threatening ordeal, and your modern medical knowledge would be about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian medicine was a blend of emerging scientific understanding, traditional remedies, and outright quackery. Germ theory, while beginning to gain traction, was not universally accepted or understood, leading to unsanitary medical practices. Anesthesia and antiseptic surgery were revolutionary, but still relatively new and not always practiced correctly. For most common ailments, people relied on home remedies or consulted local apothecaries who dispensed a dizzying array of concoctions, some genuinely helpful, many inert, and some downright dangerous. Imagine you wake up with a persistent cough and a sore throat. Your first instinct might be to reach for a cough drop or some paracetamol. Here, you'd likely be offered a spoonful of a viscous, dark syrup. It might contain opium, a common ingredient in many Victorian cough medicines and pain relievers, sold freely and without prescription. While it might numb the pain, it certainly wouldn't cure the underlying infection, and you'd likely feel drowsy and a bit disoriented. A quirky tidbit: some Victorian tonics and elixirs for general health contained cocaine or mercury, promising vigor and vitality while slowly poisoning the consumer. Your modern understanding of drug interactions and side effects would be screaming warnings at you. If your condition worsened, a doctor might be called. Picture this: a stern-faced individual, probably dressed in black, arriving with a bag full of unsettling instruments. Diagnosis often relied on observation and palpation, not sophisticated tests. For a fever, common treatments might include bloodletting, purgatives, or emetics, methods designed to balance the humors or expel imagined toxins, often leaving the patient weaker and more dehydrated. You'd find yourself resisting, knowing instinctively that these interventions are more likely to harm than help. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness of many Victorian medical treatments, often noting that the body's own healing mechanisms were probably more responsible for recovery than the interventions themselves. Even a simple wound could be perilous. Without antibiotics, a cut or scrape could easily become infected, leading to gangrene and even amputation. The idea of sterile environments, pre-surgical hand washing, and disposable needles is centuries away. You'd be terrified of even the slightest injury, knowing that a paper cut could escalate into a life-threatening crisis. Your modern first aid kit, with its antiseptic wipes and sterile bandages, would be a miracle cure in this era. Childbirth, a relatively safe procedure in the modern world, was a leading cause of death for Victorian women. Surgery, even with new anesthetics, was incredibly risky due to the high rates of infection. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis, largely eradicated or controlled in your time, ravaged the population with terrifying regularity. The concept of vaccination, while introduced, was still controversial and not widely adopted for many diseases. So, as you feel that tickle in your throat or that ache in your joints, a wave of primal fear would wash over you. There's no urgent care clinic, no advanced diagnostics, and certainly no sterile operating theaters. You are at the mercy of crude remedies, questionable medical practices, and the sheer resilience of your own body. The fragility of life and the brutal reality of illness would become terrifyingly clear. You'd probably spend the rest of your day trying desperately to avoid anything that could lead to even a minor injury or sniffle. You've somehow managed to avoid serious illness or injury, a minor miracle in itself. Now, perhaps you fancy a bit of fresh air. You envision a stroll through a manicured park or a quick drive to the countryside. Step outside the Victorian house, and you're immediately confronted with another harsh reality. The outdoors, far from being a refreshing escape, is often just as challenging and perilous as the interior. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian cities, particularly industrial ones, were incredibly polluted. Coal was the primary fuel source for homes and factories, leading to pervasive smog that often hung heavy in the air, creating a perpetual twilight. The term pea souper fog was coined to describe these thick, yellowish-green fogs that could reduce visibility to mere feet. You step outside, and the air immediately assaults your senses, not with the pleasant scent of blooming flowers, but with the acrid smell of burning coal, mingled with the less pleasant odors of horse manure, uncollected refuse, and open sewers. Your lungs, accustomed to relatively clean air, would immediately protest, a scratchy sensation developing in your throat. The streets themselves are a chaotic, unsanitary mess. Forget smooth asphalt or paved sidewalks. You're likely walking on cobblestones or uneven dirt paths, often muddy from recent rain or dusty from prolonged dry spells. There's no strict traffic control, and the streets are teeming with horses and carts, hand carts, street vendors, and throngs of pedestrians. Horse manure is ubiquitous, attracting flies and adding to the overall stench. Your pristine modern shoes would be utterly ruined within minutes, caked in mud and worse. A quirky tidbit: during particularly dense pea soupers, it wasn't uncommon for people to literally get lost in their own neighborhoods, having to rely on the muffled sounds of church bells or the faint glow of gas lamps to navigate. Imagine trying to use your phone's GPS, only to realize the satellites haven't been invented and the very air is too thick to see through. You'd feel utterly disoriented and vulnerable in what should be a simple journey down the street. And then there's the noise. Constant, grating, and utterly pervasive. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the rumble of cart wheels, the shouts of street vendors hawking their wares, the cries of children, the clang of blacksmiths, the distant roar of factory machinery. Your ears, accustomed to the insulated quiet of modern interiors, would be overwhelmed. There's no escape button, no noise-canceling headphones to drown out the cacophony. The city itself is a living, breathing, incredibly loud entity. Historians still argue about the long-term health impacts of this pervasive urban pollution on the Victorian populace, but it's clear that respiratory illnesses were rampant. You'd be breathing in a constant cocktail of coal dust, industrial fumes, and organic decay. The simple act of taking a breath would feel like an effort, and you'd find yourself coughing more often than not. And finally, the sheer danger. Pickpockets and petty criminals lurked in crowded areas and dark alleyways. Roads weren't well lit, and personal safety was far from guaranteed after dark. Accidents with horse-drawn vehicles were common. Your instinct for self-preservation, honed by modern safety standards, would be on high alert. There's no Uber for a quick, safe ride home, no well-lit pedestrian crossings. Every journey is an adventure, fraught with potential peril. So, you venture out, perhaps for a brief, necessary errand, and you immediately yearn for the clean air of your filtered home, the smooth pavement of your local park, and the comforting hum of controlled traffic. The Victorian great outdoors is a gritty, dangerous, and overwhelmingly smelly experience, proving once again that your 24 hours in this era are ticking down with increasingly challenging circumstances. You just want to go back inside, even if it means facing more chores. You've braved the smoky, muddy, and chaotic streets, perhaps ducking a horse-drawn cart or two, and you're back inside the relative, and I use that word very relatively, sanctuary of the Victorian house. As you brush off the grime from your coat, your attention might be drawn to the children. In your modern world, childhood is often seen as a protected, joyful period, filled with playdates, structured activities, and endless opportunities. In the Victorian era, it was a starkly different, often sobering, reality. Mainstream historical fact: childhood as a distinct, protected phase of life only fully emerged in the Victorian era, but it was still far from the idyllic picture we often imagine. For working-class families, children as young as 5 or 6 were often sent to work in factories, mines, or as chimney sweeps, facing grueling hours and dangerous conditions. Even for middle and upper-class children, life was characterized by strict discipline, demanding educational routines, and limited freedom compared to contemporary children. You'd observe them, and your heart would ache for their constricted lives. Imagine the children in this house. If they're from a wealthier family, their days are rigidly structured. Mornings might involve lessons with a governess or tutor, focusing on subjects like Latin, Greek, arithmetic, and deportment. Girls would also learn domestic skills, needlework, and perhaps music. Boys might be sent away to boarding school at a young age, enduring harsh conditions and strict corporal punishment. There's little room for unstructured play, for creative exploration, or for simply being a kid, as you understand it. Their toys, if they have any, are often simple: wooden dolls, tin soldiers, or perhaps a hoop and stick. No complex electronics, no vibrant plastic creations, and certainly no video games. A quirky tidbit: Some Victorian parents believed that excessive play was detrimental to a child's moral development, advocating for more serious, educational pastimes. Children's literature, while blossoming, often carried strong moral lessons, sometimes bordering on the terrifying. You might find a book where a disobedient child meets a gruesome end, designed to instill fear and conformity rather than joy. Your modern instinct to encourage self-expression and independent thought would be viewed with suspicion, perhaps even alarm. The relationship with parents would also be different. Affection might be expressed, but often with a degree of formality that seems alien to you. Children were expected to be seen and not heard, to obey without question, and to respect authority implicitly. The concept of democratic parenting or negotiating with a child simply didn't exist. You'd witness a quiet obedience, a solemnity in the children's demeanor that would strike you as profoundly sad. Historians still argue about the emotional impact of such strict upbringings on Victorian children, with some suggesting it fostered resilience and respect, while others highlight the potential for psychological repression and emotional distance. And then there's the ever-present threat of illness. Remember our discussion of Victorian medicine? Children were particularly vulnerable. Diseases like diphtheria, scarlet fever, and measles, which are now largely preventable or treatable, claimed countless young lives. The mortality rates for infants and young children were shockingly high by modern standards. You'd feel a constant knot of anxiety, knowing that a simple cough could quickly escalate into a fatal condition for a fragile child. As you watched the Victorian children playing their quiet, structured games or diligently practicing their lessons, you'd be filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the advancements in public health, education, and social attitudes that have shaped childhood in your own time. Their innocence, if it existed, was often fleeting, quickly replaced by the demands of adulthood, whether in the classroom or the factory. You're realizing that even the youngest members of this household face hardships that you, with your protected upbringing, can barely comprehend. You've witnessed the often somber realities of Victorian childhood, a stark contrast to your own formative years. Now, as the day deepens, your attention might be drawn to another integral, yet often unseen, component of the Victorian household: the servants. Whether you are a member of a wealthier family observing them, or, indeed, find yourself in the role of a servant, this dynamic reveals the rigid class structures and demanding labor that underpinned Victorian society. Mainstream historical fact: the vast majority of Victorian middle and upper-class homes relied on domestic servants to manage the immense burden of household chores. This ranged from a single maid-of-all-work in a modest home to a vast retinue of specialized staff: housekeepers, butlers, cooks, footmen, chambermaids, scullery maids, and many more, in grander estates. These individuals worked incredibly long hours, often from dawn until late at night, for very low wages, with little personal freedom or privacy. Your concepts of fair labor practices, minimum wage, or even weekends are utterly alien here. If you are the master or mistress of the house, you'd find yourself in a position of immense authority, with a constant stream of commands and expectations. You'd be responsible for overseeing their work, ensuring they maintain the house to exacting standards, and managing their meager salaries. The distance between employer and employee was vast, reinforced by strict social codes. You wouldn't engage in casual conversation with a servant, nor would you assist them with their duties. Your role is to direct, theirs is to obey. This hierarchy, so ingrained in the Victorian psyche, would feel deeply uncomfortable to your modern, more egalitarian sensibilities. But what if you were a servant? That's where your 24-hour survival challenge truly intensifies. Imagine being the scullery maid, waking before dawn in a cold, often cramped attic room shared with several others. Your first task might be to light the fires, fetch coal, and carry heavy buckets of water. Then, it's endless cleaning, polishing, scrubbing pots, emptying chamber pots, and preparing food. Your hands would be raw, your back aching, and your feet constantly sore from standing. Your meals would be simple, often leftovers from the family's table, and eaten in the servants' hall, away from the main household. A quirky tidbit: some wealthier households employed a boot boy whose sole job was to clean and polish the family's many pairs of shoes. Imagine dedicating your entire day, every day, to shining leather. It highlights the sheer division of labor and the often monotonous, specialized tasks servants performed. You'd quickly realize that your modern career aspirations, your desire for intellectual stimulation, are simply not options in this life. Historians still argue about the quality of life for domestic servants. Was it a harsh existence with little hope of advancement, or did it offer a degree of stability and security compared to other forms of labor? For you, however, the sheer relentlessness of the work and the profound lack of personal autonomy would be overwhelming. Your personal time is practically non-existent. Even your evenings might involve mending clothes or preparing for the next day's tasks. There's no downtime to decompress, no privacy to simply be yourself. The sheer physical exhaustion would be immense. You're constantly moving, lifting, scrubbing, and carrying. The concept of taking a break is a foreign luxury. You'd be perpetually tired, perpetually grimy, and perpetually aware of your place in the rigid social structure. The bells that call servants to duty would become a constant, unwelcome chime in your ear, reminding you of the endless tasks awaiting. You're not just living in a Victorian house. You're living the Victorian house through the eyes of its most enduring, yet invisible, inhabitants. Your spirit, accustomed to freedom and choice, would feel profoundly caged. You've witnessed the tireless work of servants, or perhaps you've even been one yourself for a grueling stretch of the day. The sun is now beginning its slow descent, and as the natural light outside begins to fade, a new challenge emerges: the Victorian house after dark. Your modern world is bathed in constant, ubiquitous light, from streetlights to smartphones to the soft glow of your smart home devices. Prepare for a world dominated by shadow and the flickering, uncertain dance of gaslight and flame. Mainstream historical fact: electricity for lighting was still largely in its infancy, only becoming widespread much later in the Victorian era and primarily in public spaces or very wealthy, pioneering homes. For the vast majority, the primary sources of artificial light were gas lamps. Where gas lines existed, oil lamps, and candles. These provided a fraction of the illumination you're accustomed to, casting long, dancing shadows and leaving many corners of even the grandest rooms in deep gloom. Imagine trying to read or perform intricate tasks in such dim light. Your eyes, accustomed to bright, even illumination, would strain and quickly fatigue. As twilight falls, servants would begin the laborious process of lighting up the house. This involved trimming lamp wicks, filling oil reservoirs, polishing glass chimneys, and carrying lit flames from room to room. For gaslight, it meant carefully turning on the gas taps and igniting them, a process that, while more convenient than oil lamps, still required attention and carried the faint, distinctive smell of coal gas. The entire house would never be uniformly lit. Instead, pools of yellow light would appear around lamps and fireplaces, leaving the periphery in a perpetual state of semi-darkness. A quirky tidbit: gas leaks were a real concern with early gas lighting, sometimes leading to explosions or slow poisoning. The subtle smell you might detect wouldn't just be the scent of the era, it could be a warning. You'd find yourself constantly sniffing the air, a low-grade anxiety thrumming beneath the surface of your awareness. The idea of leaving a light on all night would be an unthinkable extravagance, not to mention a fire hazard. The very atmosphere of the house changes with the onset of darkness. The familiar objects you observe during the day take on new, sometimes eerie, forms in the shifting shadows. A coat rack becomes a looming figure. A closed door suggests unseen presences. Your modern brain, accustomed to bright, reassuring light, would struggle with this perpetual dimness, making you feel uneasy and perhaps a little vulnerable. The house, already challenging during daylight, feels distinctly more menacing under the cloak of night. Historians still argue whether the limited lighting contributed to certain aspects of Victorian culture, from the emphasis on spiritualism and ghost stories to the preference for more intimate, quiet gatherings in the evenings. But for you, the practical challenges are immediate. Navigating staircases, finding misplaced items, or even just moving from one room to another becomes a cautious, slow process. You'd probably stumble more than once, cursing the lack of a simple switch. And then there's the silence. Or rather, the different kind of silence. The daytime sounds of street traffic and household bustle would lessen, replaced by the creaks and groans of an old house settling, the whispering of wind through drafty windows, and perhaps the scurrying of unseen creatures. Your ears, deprived of the constant background noise of your own time, would become acutely attuned to every rustle and bump. Your imagination, fueled by the shadows and the quiet, would likely start to play tricks on you. As the evening draws in, you'd begin to appreciate just how profoundly light shapes your modern life. It's not just about seeing. It's about safety, comfort, and a sense of control. In the Victorian house after dark, that control is largely surrendered to the dim, unpredictable dance of flame and gas. You're learning, perhaps reluctantly, that living in the past isn't just inconvenient, it's genuinely unsettling. The Victorian house is now fully cloaked in shadow, illuminated only by scattered pockets of flickering light. You've navigated the unsettling gloom of the evening, and now, as the late hours approach, your exhausted body and mind yearn for the simple comfort of sleep. But even the act of going to bed, that most fundamental human need, presents a fresh set of challenges in this bygone era. Your idea of a cozy, climate-controlled bedroom is about to be shattered. Mainstream historical fact: bedrooms in Victorian houses, especially those not directly over active fireplaces or kitchens, were often unheated and incredibly cold, particularly in winter. The concept of a comfortable, centrally heated sleeping space simply did not exist. You're entering a room where the air is likely frigid, your breath might even condense in the air, and every surface feels icy to the touch. Your pajamas, if you even brought any, would feel hopelessly thin against the biting chill. The first step is preparing for bed, and it's not a quick, modern ritual. There's no thermostat to adjust. Instead, you might have a hot water bottle to fill, carefully carrying boiling water from the kitchen range to your bedroom. This small, often rubber or metal, contraption would be your sole source of localized warmth in the vast, cold expanse of your bed. Or, if you're lucky enough to have a small fireplace in your bedroom, a servant might have lit a small fire earlier, but it would quickly die down, leaving you to the mercy of the chill. Then there's the bed itself. Forget your memory foam mattress and luxurious duvet. You're likely looking at a frame with a horsehair or feather mattress, which, while perhaps soft, offered little in the way of consistent support or warmth retention. The bed linen, while perhaps clean from a laborious hand washing, would feel cool and crisp against your skin. You'd pile on blankets, heavy wool, perhaps patchwork quilts, trying desperately to trap what little body heat you generate. The sheer weight of the covers alone would be a new sensation. A quirky tidbit: some Victorians believed that night air was unhealthy, especially for those suffering from illness, leading them to tightly close windows, even on warm nights, further contributing to stuffy, poorly ventilated bedrooms. Imagine the stale air, combined with the lingering smells of the house, all trapped around you. You'd yearn for the simple freshness of an open window, but might be advised against it by concerned, if misinformed, household members. Your pre-sleep routine, typically involving a hot shower or a quick check of social media, is replaced by a battle against the cold. Your skin feels perpetually goose-pimpled. Your feet, despite all the layers, struggle to get warm. And the sheer inconvenience of needing to use the chamber pot in the middle of the night, if you were to need it, in a dark, cold room, makes you determined to hold it until morning. Historians still argue about the impact of these sleeping conditions on public health, with some linking poor ventilation and dampness to respiratory illnesses. But for you, the immediate concern is comfort. The simple act of getting into bed, which you take for granted as a moment of release and relaxation, becomes another minor ordeal. You find yourself shivering, pulling the heavy blankets up to your chin, and curling into a tight ball, trying to minimize the exposed surface area of your body to the frigid air. As you finally settle, or attempt to settle, into the uncomfortable bed, you're acutely aware of the sheer physical discomfort of this era. Your modern body, accustomed to climate control and plush bedding, is protesting every inch of the way. You close your eyes, but the cold is a constant presence, seeping into your bones. Your 24-hour survival challenge is nearing its end, and you're learning that even the most basic human needs, warmth and rest, are luxuries in this Victorian world. You just want to feel your toes again, You've wrestled with the stiff, cold sheets, piled on every available blanket, and finally, after what feels like an eternity, drifted into a fitful slumber. But even sleep itself offers no true escape in the Victorian house. Your modern expectation of a peaceful, uninterrupted night of rest is about to be rudely shattered by the persistent realities of the era. Mainstream historical fact: sleep patterns were often different in the Victorian era. The idea of one continuous, 8-hour block of sleep was not as prevalent. Many people practiced biphasic sleep, where they would sleep for a few hours, wake for an hour or two to read, pray, or even socialize, and then return to bed for a second sleep. This pattern was often influenced by the lack of effective artificial light, which meant evenings were cut short, pushing more activity into the wee hours of the morning. You might find yourself waking up abruptly in the deep quiet of the night, your body confused and unable to settle back into a modern single sleep cycle. Even if your body tried to adjust to biphasic sleep, there would be other, less charming, interruptions. Remember the pervasive smells? They don't magically disappear at night. The lingering scent of coal smoke, the faint aroma of unemptied chamber pots, the general mustiness of the house. Your nose, now hypersensitive, would detect them even through sleep. And then there are the sounds. The creaks and groans of the old house, magnified by the silence of the night. The rattling of a window in a draft. The scuttling of unseen creatures in the walls or on the floorboards. Your modern mind, accustomed to quiet and insulated homes, would interpret every sound as a potential threat, jarring you awake. A quirky tidbit: the common bed bug was, unfortunately, a very real and prevalent problem in Victorian homes, regardless of social class. Pest control was rudimentary, and these tenacious insects would make themselves at home in mattresses and bed frames, emerging at night to feed. Imagine waking up with itchy welts, knowing that tiny, blood-sucking creatures were sharing your bed. Your comfortable, pest-free mattress is a luxury you desperately miss. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence and public health impact of bedbugs, but historical accounts certainly confirm their presence and the constant battle waged against them. And then there's the cold. Even with all those blankets, the pervasive chill of an unheated bedroom would seep into your dreams, making you shiver in your sleep. You'd constantly be aware of your exposed nose or ears, chilled by the air. The comfort of adjusting your duvet or pulling a soft comforter up around your neck is a luxury you don't possess. Instead, you're constantly fighting against the elements, even in your unconscious state. The very air quality in your bedroom might disturb your sleep. Without proper ventilation, and often with gas lamps burning, even on a low setting for some, the air could become heavy and stale. Your body, accustomed to fresh, circulating air, would feel sluggish and perhaps even a bit breathless. You wouldn't wake up feeling refreshed and invigorated, but rather groggy and still tired, as if you hadn't truly rested. So, your 24 hours in the Victorian house draw to a close, not with a burst of heroic triumph, but with a lingering sense of exhaustion and profound discomfort. You face the pervasive smells, the restrictive clothing, the primitive hygiene, the bland food, the endless chores, the rigid social rules, the lack of modern entertainment, the dangers of spoiled food, the terrifying medical practices, the polluted outdoors, the harsh realities of childhood, the demanding life of servants, the unsettling dimness of night, and finally, the restless, uncomfortable sleep. You're not just tired, you're fundamentally disoriented. Your modern body and mind, adapted to a world of convenience, cleanliness, and instant gratification, have been pushed to their limits. The romanticized image of gas lamps and elegant dresses has been replaced by the stark, gritty reality of daily Victorian life. You wouldn't have lasted, not truly, not comfortably, not without a complete overhaul of your expectations and your very being. As the first faint streaks of dawn begin to filter through the grimy windows, promising another day of toil and discomfort, your subconscious finally begins to pull you back to your own time, to the warmth of your own bed, to the silent hum of your refrigerator. The chill slowly begins to fade from your imaginary bones, replaced by the warmth of your own room. The faint, earthy scent of coal smoke gives way to the familiar, clean smell of your own space. The distant clatter of hooves and shouts of vendors soften, gradually dissolving into the gentle, reassuring quiet of your modern home. Your body uncurls from its defensive ball, your breathing deepens, and the memory of the heavy blankets and scratchy sheets softens into a hazy dream. The weight of the imaginary corset, the ache in your back from unseen chores, the nervous flutter in your stomach from unknown social faux pas, all gently recede. You are no longer navigating the dim, damp corridors of the past, but floating peacefully in the present. Let the lingering sensations of that tough 24 hours remind you just how far we've come, how much we take for granted. Allow that appreciation to settle deeply within you, a soft, comforting blanket wrapping around your awareness. The challenges of the past are now just stories, gentle whispers in the quiet of your mind. Drift, now, into the soft, silent currents of true sleep, knowing you are safe, warm, and utterly, wonderfully modern.